I still remember where I was. 11 men gone. A rig that had drilled some of the deepest wells on Earth gone. And a sea that burned for weeks. They called it the Deepwater Horizon disaster, but those of us who worked offshore, it was more than a headline. It was a warning, one we can never afford to forget. Before the world ever heard the words Deepwater Horizon, it was just another marvel of engineering. A floating fortress drilling through the seabed of the Gulf of Mexico. Mississippi Canyon Block 252, the Macondo Prospect. 5,000 feet of water above and nearly 18,000 feet of rock below. BP ran the operation. Transocean owned the rig. Halliburton handled the cement. If you have ever worked offshore, you know that's the holy trinity of risk: pressure, percussion, and pride. They were wrapping up one of the deepest exploratory wells ever drilled. By April 2010, the wellbore was open, cased, and almost ready to be sealed for later production. The crew planned to perform what's called a temporary abandonment, replace the heavy drilling mud with lighter seawater, set a cement plug, and sail to the next prospect. Simple in theory, deadly if you misread the data. According to the federal investigation report, and I quote, the Macondo well was a high-pressure, high-temperature reservoir. Well integrity depended on the quality of the cement barrier and the accurate interpretation of pressure test data. In other words, every number on those gauges was life or death. To reach the reservoir, the crew drilled through layers of sand, shale, and salt. Down there, pressures exceeded 12,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush steel. To keep that pressure at bay, they used drilling mud, dense fluid that acts as both a lubricant and a barrier. But that mud has to be managed constantly. Too heavy and you fracture the rock. Too light and the well kicks. BP's plan was aggressive. Speed up completion, reduce costs, and hand off the well to a production platform later. That's standard business, until deadlines start dictating decisions, that is. That line says a lot without saying much. Offshore, we call that production pressure. It's the quiet voice that says, we've done this before, let's keep going. And on the Macondo well, that voice was getting louder. As night fell on April 20th, the Deepwater Horizon floated calmly over a well that was anything but. Inside that steel casing, hydrocarbons were waiting, silent, compressed, and one test away from freedom. No one on board knew it yet, but the countdown had already started. April 20th, 2010 at 7:45 p.m., the crew of the Deepwater Horizon was nearly done. They had run casing, pumped cement, and were preparing to temporarily abandon the Macondo well. They believed the barriers held, but underground pressure was building. A slow, invisible rebellion. To confirm that cement job still went well, they performed a negative pressure test, a simple crucial check. You reduce the pressure inside the well and watch for flow. If the well is sealed, nothing moves. If it isn't, mud, oil, or gas will push back. In plain English, the well was talking and no one listened. They saw 1,400 psi on the drill pipe when it should have been 0. Instead of stopping, they bled pressure off the line and convinced themselves it was trapped mud. No alarms, no shutdowns. The decision to proceed would cost 11 lives. The investigation later wrote, quote, the crew accepted a theory that explained away abnormal results, allowing operations to continue without resolving the anomaly, end quote. That's how complacency hides, not in carelessness, but in confidence. As they displaced the heavy drilling mud with seawater, the last physical barrier keeping hydrocarbons down vanished. Pressure inside the wellboard surged upward, but the flow sensors registered normal. By 9 p.m., gas was entering the riser. By 9:30, it was halfway to the surface. And on the bridge, everything looked calm. 40 minutes, 40 minutes of data, indicators, and experience ignored. The alarms were there, they just weren't heard. In offshore drilling, we call that a kick. The first sign the well's taking control. If you catch it, you kill it. If you don't, it kills you. 9:47 p.m., the first mud returns hit the flow line, fast and foamy. The pumps were supposed to move fluid down the well, not back up. Then the drill floor trembled. Gas had reached the surface. In seconds, the crew went from calm to chaos. They tried diverting the flow to the mud gas separator, but it wasn't built for this. Instead of venting overboard, it vented right back onto the rig. So the report notes the diverter was lined to the MGS rather than overboard. Gas was released into enclosed areas. That routing decision turned a dangerous kick into a bomb. Gas flooded the engine rooms, turbines oversped. When methane hit the ignition source, nobody's sure which one, the first explosion tore through the starboard side. Seconds later, a second blast followed. The bridge went dark. Every alarm died with the power. Crew still alive on the drill floor scrambled for the lifeboats, but the heat was already pushing 2,000 degrees. For 36 hours, the rig burned, visible from 50 miles away. The blowout preventer, 5 stories tall, 400 tons of steel, was the final defense. It never closed. Hydraulics had leaked, batteries were dead. When investigators later recovered it, they found the blind shear ram had stopped halfway through the pipe. Imagine that. All the technology, all the training, and a single dead battery left the well wide open. That's how the Gulf began to bleed. By dawn, the Deepwater Horizon was listing, its derrick collapsing into the flames. 11 souls were gone. The rest drifted through oil-slick waters waiting for rescue. When people ask how something like this could happen, they expect a single answer, one failure, one mistake. But it wasn't that simple. It was every safeguard breaking in sequence until none were left. When the sun rose over the Gulf, the Deepwater Horizon was still burning. 36 hours after the blast, the rig collapsed into the sea. 11 men were missing, 17 were hurt, and more than 100 survivors floated among the debris and oil, waiting for rescue. The U.S. Coast Guard launched a massive rescue effort. Support vessels pulled survivors from life rafts, faces burned, uniforms blackened. For days, families along the Gulf Coast watched the horizon hoping for news that never came. BP's command center scrambled to estimate flow rates. They said it was 5,000 barrels a day. It was actually closer to 60,000 barrels a day. Every hour, the slick grew larger than the last. Fishermen tied up their boats, pelicans turned black, and for the first time in modern history, we were watching an industrial wound bleed live on television. BP and Transocean fought to regain control of the Macondo well. Robotic vehicles worked 5,000 feet down, blind in mud and debris. The first top kill failed, so did the containment dome. Pressure was too high. Hydrate ice formed instantly. That's when another drilling company was called in. The rig, a semi-submersible like the Horizon, was mobilized to help set the relief well and support the capping operation. I wasn't on board at that moment. I was on shore rotation, but I remember the briefings, the messages, and the weight of what those crews were about to do. They were going back into the same waters that had just taken 11 lives. We helped the Development Driller 3 drill the relief wells that could eventually intercept Macondo's broken casing. From the surface, you couldn't see progress, but 5,000 feet down, it was meticulous, dangerous surgery, trying to kill a well that refused to die. When the well was finally sealed, 5 months had passed. Over 5 million barrels of oil had escaped into the Gulf. It was the largest marine oil spill in history, a stain that still marks the coast today. The investigations that followed painted a clear picture. Too many warnings, too much pressure, and not enough accountability. The report wrote, organizational failures at multiple levels created a culture of risk acceptance and a loss of situational awareness on board the Deepwater Horizon. That sentence still bothers me because I've seen how easily it can happen. After Macondo, offshore training was changed forever. New regulations, blowout preventer standards, and cement testing protocols were rewritten. But some lessons don't come from a policy change. They come from the people who remember what it looked like when we got it wrong. When investigators pieced the chain together, they didn't find one villain, they found a pattern. Each barrier failed not because it was weak, but because someone believed it would hold. That's the sentence that sums it up. A cascade. A culture where time saved was money earned, and hesitation looked like failure. That mindset starts small, a skip test here, a rushed log there, until risk feels normal. The report described it as a normalization of deviance. That's when repeated small departures from procedures become routine because nothing bad happens until it does. Every safety professional knows that phrase. It's the quiet erosion that turns confidence into blindness. BP's own systems encouraged it. There were over 50 separate indicators that the well was unstable in the final hours. Every one of them rationalized away. Engineers on shore questioned the negative test results, but didn't stop the operation. Supervisors offshore accepted an explanation that fit the schedule. Everyone wanted to believe the job was done. Pressure isn't just a number on a gauge. It's cultural. It's the look you get when you slow down the job. It's the fear of being the person who speaks up and delays the plan. That kind of pressure kills more people than equipment ever will. Since Macondo rules were rewritten, but rules alone don't change culture. People do. Leadership. Real safety leadership means creating an environment where the right decision is the easiest one to make. Even if it costs time, it means listening to discomfort instead of silencing it. Every company says safety first. But on the rig that night, safety was fifth, right after time, budget, reputation, and ego. That's the real lesson of Macondo. Safety isn't a policy, it's a daily negotiation between what's right and what's easy. And if you stop negotiating, the ocean decides for you. When the smoke cleared and the lawsuits started, most people moved on. But for those of us who worked in this world, Macondo never really left us. It's a story we carry not to relive the tragedy, but to remind ourselves what silence can cost. That single line might be the most painful in the entire report. People knew something was wrong, and still they stayed quiet. Not because they didn't care, but because offshore culture had taught them to trust hierarchy over instinct. I wasn't on that rig, but I've stood on decks just like it. I know the pressure, I know the pride, and the long nights when you start convincing yourself that everything's fine. That's why this story matters. It's not about pointing fingers, it's about giving a voice to the doubts we ignore. Every safety leader faces a choice: to chase production or to protect people. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop the job, even when it makes you unpopular. Because leadership isn't about being right, it's about doing what's right. More than a decade later, the Gulf is recovering, the regulations are rewritten, and new generations are coming up behind us. But the ocean doesn't forget, and neither should we. I'm Gary Marsh, and this was Safetyology Investigates, the warning beneath the waves, where safety meets strategy and memory becomes motivation. Because every story like this is a warning written in oil, flame, and silence. And it's up to us to listen.